the room went silent. Cameras clicked, flashes lit the stage like lightning, and in that sharp brightness stood Kellyanne Conway, eyes narrowed, lips curling with the satisfaction of someone who believed she already won. She leaned forward, voice cutting through the hush, a rapid-fire barrage of so-called facts rolling off her tongue with the polished arrogance of a veteran spin doctor. Every number, every reference, every phrase sharpened like a blade, designed not to inform but to corner, to trap. She didn't just speak. She performed, scanning the audience as if waiting for applause, as if her confidence was proof enough of truth. Each word was laced with the same energy she once poured into defending the indefensible, that trademark Conway flair of twisting reality until it bent toward her will. For a moment, it felt like déjà vu, as though we had all been dragged back into an era where her voice dominated television screens and alternative facts were treated like gospel. A smirk played at the edges of her face. Kellyanne had done this countless times, and tonight, she was convinced Jasmine Crockett was just another name to add to her list of conquered opponents. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't scramble for notes or interrupt in protest. Instead, she sat there, calm, eyes locked on Conway, breathing measured, as though every insult, every distorted statistic, was nothing more than static. That composure was louder than any rebuttal. The audience began to sense it too, an energy shift, subtle but undeniable. The more Conway fired, the more it seemed she was talking into a void, her force bouncing back without penetration. The silence between each of Conway's bursts grew heavier, charged with anticipation. Some in the audience exchanged looks, as if whispering without words. Is Jasmine really just going to sit there? What they didn't know was that restraint can be a strategy. That patience, in the face of arrogance, is its own kind of power. Kellyanne leaned in even closer, doubling down, her voice rising, her confidence peaking. She thought she had landed the knockout. She felt the young congresswoman from Texas was at a disadvantage. But she was wrong. Because in just seconds, Jasmine Crockett would flip the stage, and no one saw it coming. The tension in that room was not just about two women on opposite sides of a stage. It was about two worlds colliding, two Americas locked in a duel for truth. On one side stood Kellyanne Conway, the seasoned political operative infamous for her aggressive spin tactics, a woman whose name had become synonymous with the phrase alternative facts. For years, she had thrived on chaos, turning falsehood into theater, bending perception into her personal tool of power. She was the embodiment of an older political order, slick, untouchable, arrogant. Across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, still a fresh face to many outside Texas, underestimated by critics who dismissed her as inexperienced, too young, too untested. Yet for those who knew her story, Crockett represented something more than political office. She represented a rising generation, fierce, unapologetically authentic, unwilling to let voices like Kellyanne's define reality without challenge. That night, the stakes stretched far beyond policy or debate points. This wasn't just a verbal sparring match. It was a contest over identity, over whose vision of America would dominate screens, hashtags, and headlines. Would it be the America of spin, where facts bent beneath power, where truth became a malleable weapon? Or would it be the America that demanded honesty, dignity, and accountability? Every camera was trained on them. Clips were already being cut in real time, destined to be shared within minutes on Twitter, TikTok, and late-night talk shows. The nation wasn't just watching. It was waiting, thirsty for a moment, hungry for clarity in an age of noise. And both women knew it. For Kellyanne, this was a stage to reclaim relevance, to remind America that she still had command over the art of framing reality. For Jasmine, it was a proving ground, a chance to step out of the shadows of underestimation and show she could hold her own against one of the most ruthless figures in political combat. Commentators in the back rows whispered, journalists typed furiously, and viewers at home sat at the edges of their seats. This wasn't theater. It was a cultural clash, an echo of generational turnover, a test of whether the old guard could still silence the new. Kellyanne's words cut through the hall with practiced rhythm, but it was Jasmine's silence, her composure, that stirred the air. You could feel it, the sense that something monumental was coming. The old rules of the game were trembling, and no one knew if Kellyanne's tried-and-true weapons would still land with the same force in a new era that demanded truth. This wasn't just a clash of words, it was a clash of eras, of values, of America itself. And viewers watching live could feel it. History was brewing. For more than 2 decades, Kellyanne Conway had built her reputation on a singular talent, the ability to take even the most damning truth and twist it into a weapon of persuasion. She was not merely a strategist. She was a performance artist in the theater of politics. Every line, every smirk, every deflection was calculated. In the chaos of American political combat, she had become a master illusionist, conjuring shadows where there should have been clarity and blurring lines that once separated truth from manipulation. Her rise was unconventional but relentless. Before the country knew her as Donald Trump's most loyal defender, she was already shaping narratives from the shadows. As a pollster, she studied Americans not only for their beliefs but for their fears, insecurities, and unspoken desires. She knew how to find the words that soothed anger or inflamed resentment, depending on which would serve her client best. She understood that in politics, facts were fragile, but feelings were unbreakable. If you could tap into emotion, you didn't need to win an argument, you only needed to win the gut. That philosophy carried her from the world of consulting into the eye of the political storm. When Trump's 2016 campaign teetered under the weight of scandal, Conway stepped forward, not as a liability, but as the weapon he needed most, someone who could explain away the unexplainable. Night after night, she sat under the blinding lights of cable news studios, fielding hostile questions with an unwavering smile. While journalists cited evidence, Conway pivoted. While critics demanded accountability, she redirected. And when the contradictions became too obvious to deny, she delivered the line that would forever brand her legacy. Alternative facts. To her critics, it was the moment she became a villain of American politics, a woman who had abandoned truth itself for the sake of power. To her admirers, it was proof of her brilliance, her ability to take a losing hand and bluff her way to survival. Either way, Conway had achieved something few in Washington could claim: dominance in the most hostile arena imaginable. And she didn't just survive, she thrived. Debate after debate, interview after interview, Conway emerged seemingly untouched. Opponents grew flustered. Journalists left interviews red-faced, unable to pin her down. She played not by the rules of logic, but by the rules of spectacle. And in a culture where clips spread faster than context, her speed became her shield. Each distorted number, each cherry-picked anecdote, each sly grin reinforced her aura of invincibility. By the time she stepped onto the stage opposite Jasmine Crockett, Kellyanne carried the weight of those past victories like armor. She had rattled senators, outmaneuvered seasoned anchors, and survived the most chaotic presidency in modern history. Why would this night be any different? Conway's strategy was as old as her career: flood the room. She came armed with data stripped of nuance, statistics wielded like scalpels, and stories rehearsed until they gleamed. Her intent was never to discuss, but to dominate. If she could overwhelm Crockett, bury her beneath a landslide of details, then the younger congresswoman would appear weak, hesitant, unprepared. Kellyanne believed she could still bend perception into reality simply by speaking faster, louder, and with more conviction than her opponent. She opened with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Her voice was steady, her cadence sharp, her words rolling in uninterrupted waves. She pounced on topics that played to her strengths: economic figures, immigration soundbites, familiar talking points honed during her years defending Trump. And as she spoke, she carried herself not with humility, but with the arrogance of a teacher correcting a student. To Kellyanne, Jasmine Crockett wasn't an equal. She was an upstart, an inexperienced newcomer who should have been grateful just to share the stage. Conway's every glance, every mocking smile, dripped with condescension. She leaned back when she thought she landed a decisive point, tilted her chin upward, as if the weight of superiority alone could crush her opponent. This was the Kellyanne Conway the world knew. Sharp, dismissive, untouchable. She was a woman who had grown so accustomed to winning battles of perception that she no longer feared losing one. Her past victories had calcified into arrogance. She had convinced herself that no matter who stood across from her, be it a journalist, a senator, or a congresswoman from Texas, she would always emerge unscathed. But arrogance is not the same as strength. It blinds. And on this night, it blinded Conway to the truth that the ground beneath her was shifting. What Kellyanne failed to recognize was that the culture she once dominated had changed. The audiences who once marveled at her spin now craved authenticity. The nation, scarred by years of political chaos, was less tolerant of distortions and more eager for voices that spoke plainly, with conviction rooted in lived experience. In Jasmine Crockett, Conway was not facing a nervous rookie. She was facing the embodiment of a new era, a leader shaped not by polls and optics, but by resilience, identity, and the refusal to bow. Yet Kellyanne didn't see it. She mistook Crockett's calm for weakness, her silence for surrender. And so she pressed harder, raising her voice, layering spin upon spin, certain that victory was inevitable. The more she spoke, the more convinced she became that she was writing Crockett's obituary in real time. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that every word she uttered was digging her deeper into a trap not set by accident, but by design. For Jasmine Crockett's stillness lay a strategy. In her restraint lay preparation. And Kellyanne Conway, too blinded by her own arrogance to recognize the danger, was walking straight into the fall. Because arrogance blinds. And Kellyanne never saw the trap she was walking into. Jasmine Crockett's story does not begin on a grand stage, beneath television lights, or in the halls of Congress. It begins in Texas, where the heat bakes into the skin, where roots run deep, and where every word carries the weight of history. Born into a community too often overlooked, too often underestimated, Jasmine learned early that silence was never safety. She grew up in a world where voices like hers, young, black, female, were expected to wait their turn, to step aside, to accept less. But Jasmine never accepted less. Her Texas upbringing was not easy, but it was formative. She knew what it meant to fight for every inch, to demand space in rooms that weren't built for her. Education was her first weapon. She pushed herself through schools where expectations were uneven, where some teachers assumed greatness and others assumed failure before she ever opened her mouth. And each time she encountered doubt, she turned it into fuel. Where others saw limits, she saw tests. The path to law was not an accident. It was destiny forged by necessity. Jasmine saw injustice not in theory, but in daily life. She watched friends, neighbors, and classmates treated as statistics, dismissed by systems meant to serve them. She understood from a young age that laws could be cages or they could be shields, and that who wielded them made all the difference. When she pursued her law degree, it wasn't just to wear the title of attorney. It was to arm herself for battle. In the courtroom, she became a fighter for the voiceless. Her clients weren't CEOs or power brokers. They were the marginalized, the dismissed, the ones who had been told no more times than they could count. She defended protesters who dared to speak out. She defended young people facing charges that could have derailed their lives before they even began. For Jasmine, every case was personal because every case reflected the bigger story, a system stacked against the vulnerable. But the courtroom wasn't enough. Jasmine saw the same pattern repeating over and over. She could fight case by case, person by person, but the system itself remained rigged. That's when politics called her. Not as a career path, not as an ambition, but as an obligation. She knew stepping into the political arena meant opening herself to attacks sharper than any cross-examination. But she also knew that if people like her didn't step forward, the status quo would never crack. Her first campaigns were uphill battles. Critics dismissed her as too bold, too brash, too unwilling to soften her edges. But those edges were what her community loved most about her. She wasn't polished in the way career politicians were polished. She was raw, real, unafraid to say what others tiptoed around. She wore her identity with pride, not as a shield but as a declaration. She didn't try to blend in. She stood out, deliberately, defiantly. Each election cycle, Jasmine built her name not through backroom deals, but through tireless groundwork. She knocked on doors herself. She showed up at rallies, not as a guest speaker, but as a participant. She listened as much as she spoke, and in communities accustomed to being ignored, that alone was revolutionary. Slowly, she built a following. People who had never felt represented before saw themselves in her. Her victories were not just personal wins. They were proof that voices once silenced could rise. By the time Jasmine stepped onto the national stage, she carried more than her own ambition. She carried generations. She carried the weight of every young black woman told she wasn't enough. She carried the hopes of immigrants who still believed America could be more than broken promises. She carried the fire of activists who had marched, protested, and risked everything just to push this country a little closer to its ideals. Jasmine didn't just represent herself. She represented possibility. Still, with representation came pressure. Every debate, every hearing, every televised moment was loaded with expectation. The margin for error was razor thin. For her, mistakes weren't private. They became ammunition for those eager to claim she didn't belong. And yet, that pressure forged her sharper. Every slight, every insult, every headline questioning her qualifications only reinforced her resolve. She was not here by accident. She was here because she refused to be denied. That resilience is what prepared her for moments like the one with Kellyanne Conway. Jasmine's life had been a masterclass in handling pressure. In law, she had learned to dissect arguments built on shaky foundations. In politics, she had learned to stay rooted while others tried to knock her off balance. In life, she had learned that being underestimated could be turned into her greatest advantage. But the emotional core of Jasmine Crockett was never just about fighting. It was about caring. Every case she took, every speech she gave, every vote she cast, it all traced back to people, not policy. She remembered faces, not statistics. She remembered the single mother working 2 jobs who told her she had no faith left in government. She remembered the young man she defended, who later sent her a letter saying she saved his future. These memories weren't side notes. They were the fire behind her fight. When Jasmine entered that debate stage against Conway, she brought all of this with her. To Kellyanne, it might have looked like a rookie facing a veteran. To Jasmine, it was the culmination of years of proving herself against doubt, of staring down condescension, of refusing to bend even when bending would have been easier. The national media might have seen it as just another sparring match. But for Jasmine, this wasn't another debate. This was her proving ground. A chance to show that truth could still hold its own against spin. That representation could stand tall against dismissal. That a new era could rise from the ashes of old manipulations. And as she sat across from Kellyanne, steady, silent, calculating, she knew one thing. Everything in her journey had led here. Every struggle, every setback, every victory had prepared her not to merely survive this moment, but to own it. This wasn't just about Jasmine Crockett answering Kellyanne Conway. It was about Jasmine Crockett answering history. Because this wasn't just another debate for Jasmine. This was her proving ground. The debate's temperature began to rise, not with shouts from both sides, but with one voice dominating the air, Kellyanne Conway's. Her words came rapid and insistent, her interruptions slicing through the moderator's attempts at balance. "Let me finish, because these are the facts," she declared, her voice sharp, pitched just high enough to feel scolding. She rattled off unemployment numbers, twisted crime statistics, and half-contextualized policy notes. She leaned back, cocky, like someone who had played this role so many times she could do it in her sleep. Every time Jasmine opened her mouth, Conway pounced, cutting in mid-sentence with the smooth aggression of someone rehearsed in controlling the narrative. "No, no, no, you don't get to rewrite history. Here's what really happened." The dismissiveness wasn't subtle. It dripped from every syllable, the kind of tone meant to diminish not only Jasmine's arguments, but her very authority to speak. But Jasmine didn't bite. She didn't raise her voice to match Conway's. She didn't flinch under the storm of interruptions. Instead, she leaned back slightly, her face steady, her eyes never leaving Conway's, as though she were letting her opponent unravel without interference. Every interruption only magnified that contrast. Kellyanne's desperate insistence versus Jasmine's unshaken poise. The audience felt it. You could hear it in the murmurs that rippled across the room. Side glances turned into wide-eyed exchanges. Whispers buzzed between rows. Some shifted uncomfortably at Conway's aggression. Others leaned forward, sensing Jasmine was holding something back. The tension grew thicker with every moment she didn't respond. Kellyanne's voice, once sharp and commanding, began to sound overextended, too loud, almost desperate. Her confidence edged into condescension. She jabbed her finger toward the audience, waved her hands theatrically, raising her volume as if she could shout her way into victory. "You can't argue with numbers. You can't argue with history," she barked. And still, Jasmine sat composed, her silence an answer of its own. She wasn't retreating, she was preparing. The longer Conway spoke, the clearer it became to those watching. The Congresswoman from Texas wasn't being outmatched. She was setting the stage. Every camera in the room zoomed in, trying to capture the unfolding drama. This wasn't just two people trading words anymore. It was a duel of presence, of strategy, of who could bend the room's energy to their side. Conway thought volume was power. Jasmine knew patience was sharper. "Ladies and gentlemen," Conway said, her voice reaching its peak. "This is what happens when emotion replaces facts, when rhetoric replaces reality. And I won't let this stage be hijacked by—" She stopped mid-sentence. Not because she chose to, but because Jasmine finally moved. She straightened in her chair, adjusted her mic, and let the silence stretch just long enough to command every heartbeat in the room. The air froze. Even Conway leaned back, suddenly aware she'd been speaking into a trap. Everyone leaned in, waiting for Jasmine's move. And then, with a pause that froze the room, Jasmine struck. For nearly 20 minutes, Kellyanne Conway had filled the stage with a blizzard of words, statistics tossed like darts, selective memory masquerading as certainty, and interruptions sharp enough to draw gasps from the crowd. She thought she had the upper hand. She thought sheer force would corner Jasmine Crockett into flustered silence. But Jasmine wasn't silent because she was cornered. She was silent because she was sharpening the blade. When Jasmine finally leaned forward, cleared her throat, and adjusted the microphone, the room stilled. The cameras caught it, the audience felt it. The rhythm shifted. Kellyanne had just spent her energy sprinting. Jasmine was about to run the marathon. "Kellyanne," she began, her voice calm but firm. "You say you're bringing facts. But facts without truth are like bricks without mortar. They collapse under the slightest pressure." The crowd hummed, a low ripple of acknowledgement. Conway smirked dismissively, arms crossed, ready to interject. But Jasmine didn't give her the chance. "Let's start with your unemployment numbers," Jasmine continued. "You cherry-picked the lowest quarter of the year and conveniently ignored the spike that came right after, when working-class families, especially black and brown families, lost jobs at twice the rate. That's not a fact. That's a spin." She said the last word slowly, deliberately, letting it sting. The audience broke into scattered applause. Some laughed, not at Jasmine, but at Conway, at how effortlessly the air of authority had been punctured. Kellyanne straightened in her chair, jaw tightening. "That's not—" She tried to interject. But Jasmine was ready. She raised a hand gently, like a teacher quieting a restless classroom. "I'll let you finish. Now it's my turn." The room erupted in cheers. Conway leaned back, caught for the first time in the debate looking small. Jasmine pressed forward, her tone crisp, her cadence surgical. "You mentioned crime statistics. You want to talk about rising numbers? Let's talk about the fact that gun violence soared under policies your party championed. Policies that weakened safeguards and let weapons flood our communities. You can throw numbers around all day, but unless you face their human cost, you're not talking about facts. You're talking about theater." The crowd roared. A wave of applause crashed through the room, forcing the moderator to pause for order. Conway shifted uncomfortably, her usual smirk faltering into a tight, defensive smile. Her hands, once animated and commanding, now fiddled with her pen. Her eyes darted to the cameras, as though searching for an anchor. But Jasmine wasn't done. She was building momentum now, turning the room into her courtroom. Every line a closing argument, every rebuttal a strike of the gavel. "You want to lecture me about reality," Jasmine said, her voice rising with passion. "But let me tell you what reality looks like. Reality is the mother working 2 jobs in Dallas, still unable to afford healthcare because of policies you defended. Reality is the student drowning in debt while billionaires celebrate tax cuts. Reality is communities in Texas and across America fighting to breathe. Literally, because industries are allowed to pollute without accountability." Thunderous applause rolled through the audience. Some stood. The energy shifted so dramatically that it was almost physical. You could feel the current running through the room. Conway tried to cut in again, her voice suddenly higher-pitched, almost pleading. "That's not fair." But Jasmine turned her head slowly, eyes locked, and delivered the line that dropped the hammer. "Kellyanne, facts don't lie. But spin does. And America's tired of spin." The silence lasted half a second, just long enough to let the weight of her words sink in. Then it exploded. The crowd erupted in cheers, whistles, and applause that drowned out Conway's sputtering. The moderator tried to regain control, but even they were smiling, unable to resist the raw electricity of the moment. Kellyanne blinked, stunned. Her mouth opened as if to speak, then closed again. For once, the Queen of Spin had no words. Her body language betrayed her, arms now crossed defensively, shoulders hunched, her gaze downward. She looked less like the master strategist and more like someone who had been unmasked in front of the nation. And Jasmine, she didn't gloat. She didn't grin. She simply sat back, composed, as though the mic drop wasn't just a line but a culmination, years of preparation, lived experience, and a refusal to be drowned out. Cinematically, it was perfect. The camera caught Conway blinking, caught Jasmine steady as stone, caught the audience surging to their feet. In that instant, the balance of power shifted. The debate was no longer a contest. It was a coronation. For Jasmine Crockett, this wasn't just a victory in words. It was proof. Proof that authenticity can disarm spin, that clarity can cut through noise, and that truth, when spoken with courage, can still bring a room to its feet. And as Conway sat rattled, staring down at her notes, Jasmine glanced toward the crowd, her expression resolute. She hadn't just survived Kellyanne Conway. She had dismantled her, piece by piece, line by line, until the architect of alternative facts was left speechless. The night belonged to Jasmine. The instant Jasmine's final words echoed, the room was no longer a room. It was history in motion. The crowd's eruption shook the stage, but what neither Kellyanne nor anyone else fully realized in that moment was that the echo wouldn't stay contained. It would ricochet through phones, feeds, airwaves, and living rooms. Within seconds, the microphones and cameras that had captured the exchange began transmitting what would become one of the most replayed, remixed, and reinterpreted moments in modern political memory. Twitter, or rather, the platform people still called the town square, lit up like wildfire. Hashtags started bubbling. Within 5 minutes, Jasmine's name trended nationwide. Within 20, it went global. Clips surfaced with captions that read like rally cries. "This is how you handle a bully. Every young woman of color needs to see this. Kellyanne just got crocked." Memes followed fast. Someone spliced the footage with a boxing knockout, overlaying Jasmine's final line with the slow-motion fall of a heavyweight champ. Another turned Conway's stunned silence into a GIF loop, paired with the caption, "When the spin stops spinning." In dorm rooms, coffee shops, and late-night kitchens, young progressives replayed the clip not once, but over and over, savoring the reversal, a rare instance where the underdog didn't just hold her own, but completely flipped the script. Cable news seized it next. Anchors, normally buttoned up and cautious, couldn't hide their smirks as they replayed the knockout exchange. CNN ran it every half hour. MSNBC panelists broke it down frame by frame like sports commentators analyzing a game-winning shot. Even Fox News, usually friendly turf for Conway, couldn't avoid the replay, though their spin was desperate, calling Jasmine performative. Yet, even in criticism, they broadcast the moment to millions more screens. Celebrities added fuel. Kerry Washington tweeted a clip with the caption, "Grace, Power, Truth." Mark Ruffalo called Jasmine the kind of fighter America needs. Ava DuVernay posted simply, "Iconic." Each share added legitimacy, converting what could have been just another blip into a cultural marker. Suddenly, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a congresswoman from Texas. She was a national name, a face of resistance, a symbol of truth standing tall against deception. And then came the donations. Grassroots fundraising platforms reported surges unlike anything seen in months. Small dollar contributions, $5 here, $10 there, poured in by the tens of thousands. By morning, Jasmine's campaign had raised over $1 million, all from ordinary people who felt that in her, they had finally found someone who could speak the truth without flinching. "She speaks for us," donors wrote in comment boxes. "She fights like we wish we could." Community organizations latched on, too. Progressive groups used the clip in recruitment drives, showing new volunteers exactly why politics mattered. High school students clipped it for TikTok explainers about truth and media spin. College activists shared it as a rallying cry before campus marches. For them, Jasmine's mic drop wasn't just entertainment. It was proof that someone inside the halls of power could still channel their anger, their exhaustion, their hope. Meanwhile, Conway's allies scrambled. Her office put out a statement claiming Jasmine had been disrespectful. Right-wing pundits tried to redirect the narrative, framing Conway as the victim of liberal mob applause. But it rang hollow. The problem wasn't that Jasmine had been rude. It was that Jasmine had been right. The power of facts delivered with moral clarity had pierced through the fog of talking points. Editorial boards weighed in. The New York Times called the exchange a cultural turning point in the battle between spin and truth. The Washington Post described Jasmine's performance as a masterclass in patience, timing, and precision. Even international outlets like The Guardian and BBC covered it, framing Jasmine as the rising American lawmaker who silenced Trump's former advisor. But beyond headlines, the deeper impact brewed in living rooms and group chats across the country. Parents showed their kids, saying, "This is why you speak up when someone lies." Immigrants texted the clip to family members overseas, proud that someone like Jasmine could stand tall in the political arena. And young women of color, long told to be quiet, to be careful, to never show too much passion, suddenly had a role model who didn't shrink in the face of power, but stared it down, unflinching. In barbershops, people debated the lines like they were lyrics. In classrooms, teachers played the clip to discuss rhetoric and truth. Churches invoked Jasmine's courage in sermons about justice. It wasn't just politics, it was culture, and culture has always been the battlefield where the future gets decided. Kellyanne, once the master manipulator of narratives, had become the meme. Her confidence now looked like overreach. Her smirk, replayed in slow motion before Jasmine's retort, became the frozen image of hubris meeting its limit. For years, Conway had dominated airwaves with sharp comebacks and spin. But now, her words felt stale, her tactics predictable. Arrogance had turned her into a caricature of herself. What started as one debate began to ripple into something much bigger, a movement of reclaiming truth from manipulation. By the week's end, pundits weren't asking if Jasmine had won the exchange. They were asking what it meant for the Democratic Party, for representation, for the future of American politics. Some saw in Jasmine the early sparks of a presidential contender. Others saw her as the standard-bearer of a new generation, bold, unapologetic, unwilling to play by rules designed to silence her. And for progressives who had grown tired of seeing leaders fold under pressure, Jasmine's moment was proof that resistance could look not only fierce but victorious. The cultural earthquake was undeniable. Hashtags evolved into slogans on posters. Memes turned into t-shirts. Grassroots groups replayed the clip before strategy meetings, letting Jasmine's voice remind them what they were fighting for. And through it all, one truth kept resurfacing, one that carried more weight than any pundit's take. Jasmine Crockett had not just defended herself. She had flipped the power dynamic on live television. She had shown that spin, no matter how polished, could be undone by clarity. She had proven that truth, delivered with courage, could still cut through the noise. The debate had ended, but the shockwaves were only beginning. Because if Jasmine could dismantle one of the most seasoned spinners in politics, what else might she dismantle next? When the echoes of applause finally faded, what remained was not just the memory of a clash, but the undeniable imprint of a lesson America needed to hear. This moment wasn't about one politician sparring with another. It wasn't about a clever line or a viral takedown. It was about the values at stake when truth collides with manipulation, when authenticity faces arrogance, and when courage walks onto a stage built to intimidate and transforms it into a proving ground. Jasmine Crockett didn't just answer Kellyanne Conway that night. She answered years of frustration, years of watching spin dominate headlines, years of seeing ordinary Americans feel like their truth, their reality, their pain was invisible in the halls of power. For too long, Conway had symbolized the arrogance of a political class that believed narratives could be twisted endlessly, that words could be bent until they served power rather than the people. Her alternative facts had become a punchline, but also a wound, proof of how fragile truth had become in the public square. And yet, it only takes one clear, unshaken voice to cut through the fog. That night, Jasmine's voice was that beacon. Calm, sharp, and deeply rooted in her lived experience, she reminded everyone watching that facts aren't abstract chess pieces to be moved by those in power. Facts are lived realities. Facts are eviction notices pinned to doors in neighborhoods Conway never walked. Facts are parents working 2 jobs, immigrants building new lives, and young people marching in the streets for justice. Facts are not malleable. They are the backbone of dignity. The beauty of Jasmine's victory was not just in the way she dismantled Conway's claims, point by point, stripping away the veneer of confidence until nothing remained but empty spin. It was in how she reframed the very conversation. She didn't fight on Kellyanne's terms. She refused to drown in the flood of cherry-picked data and sharp-tongued interruptions. Instead, she stood steady, grounding her rebuttals in truth that resonated far beyond that stage. She reminded Americans that leadership is not about who can shout louder or craft the slickest one-liner. Leadership is about who can hold their ground with dignity when every attempt is made to shake them. The aftermath proved it. On social media, millions weren't just celebrating a clapback. They were celebrating something deeper, a glimpse of a political future where authenticity triumphs over arrogance. They shared Jasmine's words not because they were clever, but because they rang true. They laughed at Kellyanne's stunned silence. Yes, but they also saw themselves in Jasmine's calm, collected strength. For immigrant families, for women of color, for young activists tired of being dismissed, this wasn't just entertainment. It was validation. And the lesson carried beyond politics. In workplaces, classrooms, and homes, people whispered, "Did you see what she did?" Because what Jasmine did wasn't confined to one debate. It was a reminder that every person can flip a script. That truth, delivered with courage, can dismantle arrogance in any room, whether it's a debate stage or a boardroom, a classroom or a dinner table. America has long wrestled with misinformation, with spin packaged so neatly that lies start to feel like reality. But the Crockett-Conway clash proved something essential. No matter how loudly manipulation shouts, dignity whispers louder, and the world leans in to hear it. Jasmine's victory was not a single battle won, but a signal flare in the darkness, illuminating a path forward. A path where young leaders no longer have to conform to the old games of power, but can instead redefine the rules with courage and authenticity. In years to come, people will look back at that debate not as a spectacle, but as a cultural turning point. They'll say, this was the night arrogance finally met its match. They'll remember how Kellyanne Conway, polished, practiced, certain of her dominance, stumbled not because she lacked skill, but because she lacked truth. And they'll remember how Jasmine Crockett, underestimated, dismissed, but unwavering, rose not because she had the perfect facts memorized, but because she embodied what those facts meant to real people. In that sense, Jasmine's triumph wasn't just personal. It was symbolic. It was America's reminder that truth has power, that authenticity has weight, that dignity can still outshine manipulation. For every young person wondering if their voice matters, for every activist exhausted by the grind of being unheard, for every community pushed aside by politics as usual, Jasmine Crockett's moment on that stage will echo as proof that yes, truth can still win. And that is the moral that will outlive the noise of the night. Because in an age of misinformation, it is tempting to believe lies can bury truth forever. But the Crockett-Conway clash told a different story. Truth may be attacked, spun, twisted, but when delivered with courage, it does not just survive. It rises. It resonates. It inspires. And in the end, it triumphs. Jasmine's words still linger like a rallying cry. Facts don't lie. Spin does. And America's tired of spin. In those words lives the essence of a new kind of leadership. A leadership that doesn't bend reality to fit power, but bends power back toward reality. A leadership that doesn't divide to conquer, but unites to build. A leadership that proves that even in the noisiest, most manipulative age, dignity, simple, grounded, human dignity, still resonates louder than all the spin in the world. And as the lights dimmed on that stage, the audience knew it. Viewers at home felt it. A country yearning for something real, something honest, something rooted in justice and truth, finally saw it. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a debate. She reminded America that its heartbeat is strongest when truth, justice, and courage speak as one. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a movement. And the lesson is clear. In a world desperate for authenticity, it will always be truth, not arrogance, not spin, not manipulation, that carries the day. Kellyanne Conway walked onto that stage with the same confidence she had carried for years. The confidence of someone who had bent narratives, outpaced opponents, and spun entire news cycles into her favor. She believed Jasmine Crockett would be just another obstacle to bulldoze with polished lines and alternative facts. But history had other plans. Because when Conway tried to corner Jasmine with her so-called facts, something remarkable happened. Jasmine didn't just defend. She didn't just counter. She flipped the entire stage in an instant. The trap Conway had prepared became her own undoing, and America witnessed the rarest of things. Spin collapsing under the weight of truth. This wasn't only about politics. It was about something deeper, about the difference between arrogance and authenticity, between manipulation and dignity. Conway embodied the old playbook, where spectacle and deception ruled. Jasmine represented something new, a leadership rooted in lived experience, moral clarity, and courage. And that difference is why this moment became unforgettable. As the crowd erupted, as Conway blinked in disbelief, a truth much larger than either woman filled the air. Arrogance always crumbles when it collides with conviction. Manipulation always falters when faced with authenticity. And spin, no matter how sharp, no matter how rehearsed, will always break when truth stands tall against it. But here's the lesson. The reason this story matters beyond one debate stage. America is at a crossroads. Every day, we're surrounded by voices trying to bend reality, to distract, to spin us into confusion. And yet, moments like Jasmine's prove that clarity still cuts through. Courage still wins. Dignity still commands the room. That's why this isn't just entertainment. It's a call. A call to stand on the side of authenticity. A call to choose dignity over deception. A call to amplify the voices who refuse to play by the spin machine's rules. So here's what I'm asking you. Don't let this moment fade into memory. Share it. Tell others. Keep the ripple going. Be part of the movement that says truth will not be drowned out. Not by arrogance. Not by manipulation. Not by spin. And if you want more stories like this, more moments where authenticity triumphs and dignity roars louder than deception, then subscribe. Join us. Because together, we can make sure the truth isn't just heard. It's unstoppable.